got a long time before you're up in the generations I'm in, but when you're a septuagenarian like me, I can't tell you how much it charges you up to be around a bunch of young people like you. I admire you for coming here and putting up with this all day long, but I'll tell you, if you come here and listen, there probably is a pony in there somewhere. And if you'll apply yourself and think about all these problems we have today, we're going to hand off to you the greatest number of problems that we probably faced in our nation in the entirety of our nation. And so if you concentrate on that and think your way through that a little bit, you'll be better prepared for what you're going to meet as you leave this great institution. And you'll also be better prepared than your competitors, which is going to mean a lot to you as you go forward in life. I sat down this weekend to try to figure out what 3 or 4 most important things that I saw unfolding for us that were great problems that I could lay out for you. And when I ended up my piece of paper, I had about 12 things, which is terrible. So I necked that down to the 3 that probably concern me the most. It's really 3 scenarios. The first one is where we are right now in Iraq and what do we do about it? The second one is how do we really look at and what must we do to address the radical Islamic movement? And the third one is a huge problem that you're really going to have to deal with in your adulthood, and that's the widespread of nuclear proliferation. The problem we have right now, I believe, is we don't have a national security doctrine. And we need to have one that, number 1, is appealing to our allies. Number 2 is defensible in international law. And number 3 is acceptable and understandable by the American people. And I'll come back to that before I end. Before I get into Iraq, let me read you a quotation about Iraq that was made in 1991 by a famous man. He said, in Iraq, if you're going to go in and you're going to try to topple Saddam Hussein, you got to go to Baghdad. And once you've gotten to Baghdad, it's not clear what you do with it. It's not clear what kind of government you'd put in place. The kind of government you'd put in place with the one that's currently there. Is it going to be a Shia regime? Or is it going to be a Sunni regime? Or is it going to be a Kurdish regime? Or one that tilts toward the Ba'athist? Or one that tilts toward the Islamic fundamentalist? How much credibility is that government going to have if it's set up by the U.S. military? And how long does the U.S. military have to stay there and protect the people that sign up for the government? What happens once we leave? It's 1991. That was comments by Dick Cheney. That was before he drank the Kool-Aid. Let me start with Iraq. The surge that's going on now has worked. And I have to handle, to me, there's 3 reasons it worked. Number 1, David Petraeus and Ryan Crocker are 2 great individuals. They're the 2 best that we've had there so far better than anyone else that was there. And they've done a superb job. Number 2, I believe that the militants, especially al-Sadr, has been quiet because he's saving his energy and he's just regrouping. And third, the Sunnis that have come forth, they did that because they're sick of al-Qaeda. They want to kick al-Qaeda out. But they're also rearming, and we're rearming them. They're prepared. The preparation is going on for whenever we leave. If you look at the central government today there, I don't think it works. I think it's incompetent. It's corrupt. It seems to me to be paralyzed. I mean, they can't even distribute the money they have down into the governance so they can do some work. I don't think Maliki has any political power, and the political power he does really stems from the deep-seated organizations he is within the Shia movements. And if you look at Iraq, there's no common leader. I mean, if you're a Sunni, Shia, Kurd, there's no common person that you can group around. There's no indication to me that the Shias are prepared to share power with the Sunnis. There's no indication to me that the Sunnis are prepared to live as a minority under a majority Shia rule. And likewise, the Kurds don't want to be ruled by Baghdad. They're not going to be ruled by Baghdad, and especially from the Sunnis. I believe that of all the agendas in the Iraqi government, that they are all sectarian agendas, and that's not going to work. The administration's plan for an Iraqi government modeled after a Western-style democracy was never going to work, and it's not working now. And as you look at Western democracy, a Western democracy is a government of, by, and for the people. The leader's authority in a Western democracy is given to them by the people who vote for them, vote them into office. In the Islamic world, it's God who, not the people, who gives the government its legitimacy. So in the Middle East, you find, generally speaking, except with probably two exceptions, you find, three exceptions, you find either a cleric in charge or a strongman in charge, or a royal ruling class. But it's not a democracy as we see it, and it's hard to take those concepts, and they're not interchangeable with the way we do things. I think, to me, as we prepare to withdraw over time from Iraq, the only solution is federalism. And federalism means that you create federal entities inside Iraq. Doesn't mean you do away with the Iraqi government, but you create strong federal entities. The Iraqi Constitution allows for this. That was Senator Joe Biden's plan for Iraq. And their national security advisor, Mofat al-Rabai, has written several op-eds saying that if we're going to survive, we have to do it under a federal system, not in a central government system like we have now. You already have the perfect model for that over there. It's the three northern provinces of Dahuk, Sulaymaniyah, and Erbil. And that's what we call Kurdistan, but it's really the Kurdish regional government. And they've had quasi-autonomy since 1991. They have their own constitution. Their constitution's 15 years old now. They've had their own elections, democratic elections, since 1992. They have their own army. In fact, they have the best army in Iraq, the Peshmerga. They collect their own taxes. They negotiate their own oil deals. If you look at Kurdistan today, which is part of Iraq, and you trace what's happened there, there has not been one soldier killed or wounded in Kurdistan since 1991. There hasn't been one contractor injured or kidnapped up there. Not one foreign business has been attacked, and there's over 1,000 foreign businesses in the three northern provinces of Iraq, in Kurdistan. So if we go to federalism, if we were to do that, what happens is you put the people in an ethnic, religious, and tribal comfort zone that they're not now in. And so what you do, you take the radical Shia and Sunni paramilitary elements, and they become the security forces for the federal regions. They don't have to fight each other anymore. They just have to protect their own people. The Sunnis and Shia then will find a leader that they can follow, just like the Kurds have up north. Kurds, the president of Kurdistan is Masoud Barzani, and the prime minister is Nashirwan Barzani. You know, and by the way, the president of Iraq, as you probably know, is a Kurd, Jalal Talabani. In fact, Iraq is really receiving its leadership from the Kurds. You have Talabani as the president. You have the foreign minister, Hoshar, is a Kurd. You have the deputy prime minister, Barham Salem, is a Kurd, and the chief of staff of the Iraqi army, General Babakir, is a Kurd. So what's happened up there is the Kurds, through their autonomous design and how they do things, they are far ahead of the rest of Iraq on how to govern themselves. And so I think what we need to do is gently put Iraq into a federal system, model really on the three northern provinces. You still keep a central government, but the real fist of government felt by the people comes from their federal district and not from Baghdad. And over time, they'll either come together in a stronger unity or they'll break apart. And right now, I think either one of those is okay. In order to do that, you have to guarantee the Sunnis that they get their share of the oil. And the central government really would remain. But again, like I say, the power of government felt by the people would be out of the federal districts. I'm afraid if we don't do that, as we withdraw, we'll have a civil war between the Sunni and the Shia. And it'll be a genocidal civil war. And what the Kurds will do, they'll say, we're not participating in this. We're autonomous. We're not having anything to do with this at all. And that will incite the Turks to say, oh, we're not going to have an autonomous Kurdistan, and they'll invade Kurdistan. They will have more problems than we ever thought we'd have. So I think we need to solve that problem now. Let me leave Iraq now and turn to the next challenge that y'all are going to have as you become adults and run this world. This one is the radical Islamic movement. And to me, I think that is our most obvious long-term threat. The movement seeks to overthrow the Middle East regimes that are friendly to us. It seeks to evict our presence from their part of the world, and it seeks to establish the Islamic Caliphate that will go from East Asia all the way to the Atlantic. Now think about the Islamic world, in which 98% of them are great people, but you have a few in there, 2 and 3% that are radicals, it really, really causes trouble. The Islamic world goes from the Atlantic coast of North Africa, through the Middle East, into Central Asia, all the way into East Asia, and in the most populous Muslim country there, the country of Indonesia. And this is a population, as you look across that arc, this is a population of well over 1 billion people. Like I say, 98% of which are great people. But you take that 1 billion people, that's a big number, and it's a fertile recruiting grounds for the radical Islamic movement. And they seek access to weapons of mass destruction. They have modern communications, and through those modern communications, they have global reach. None of us should be under the illusion that this war will be won quickly, because it's not. And what we currently have in our nation is a short war mentality and a short war strategy that's absolutely no match at all for the long war that we're in. Over the past 6 years, we really allowed the development of dangerous and very, very robust Shia arc. This arc begins in Iran. It dominates all of southern Iraq. It receives finances and support, plus military and political protection from Syria. And it wreaks absolute havoc on both Lebanon and Israel. And this arc is growing, and it's rapidly moving west. The radical Islamic movement didn't begin on September 11, 2001. It's been here with us for over 20 years. Let me just give you a little chronology of what's happened. 1979, the seizure of the embassy, the U.S. Embassy in Iran. April 1983 in Beirut, the car bomb at the U.S. Embassy killed 63 people. October 83, again in Beirut, the car bomb at the U.S. Marine Corps headquarters kills 241 Marines and sailors. December 83, the car bomb at the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait. August 85, the car bomb at Rhein Main Air Force Base, the U.S. Air Force Base kills 22. October of 85, the capture of the cruise ship, the Achille Laurel, where they kill a paralyzed man, Leon Klinghoffer. In April of 86, a bomb on TWA Flight 840 goes off and kills 4. In 1988, the bomb on Pan Am Flight 103 goes off and kills 259 in Lockerbie, Scotland. January 1993 at CIA headquarters, 2 agents were shot by radicals entering into the CIA. February 93, and this is one everybody forgot. February 93, the car bomb at the World Trade Center goes off, kills 6, and injures over 1,000. We forgot about that. We forgot about that for 8 years. June 96, Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, the bomb goes off and kills 19, injures 500. 1997, at the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, bombs go off and kill 224. 1999, the USS frigate, the USS Cole, is attacked and kills 17 sailors. And September 11, 2001, that's our event. Over 3,000 Americans are killed. And since then, you have in Madrid, London, riots in Paris. All this is a moving arc of the radical Islamic movement. And now it's time to wake up to this. And what we need now is leadership and not rhetoric. And we're getting more rhetoric than leadership. Let me move now to another bright subject, and that's nuclear proliferation. That, I think, is the next, while the other was the longest, I think our long-term threat. This one, nuclear proliferation, is, I think, the major challenge we have right now to U.S. security. And what we're doing, what you see as you look out, we're witnessing the spread of nuclear weapons to really unstable states. Since 1998, India and Pakistan have created nuclear arsenals, and they have quite a few nuclear weapons. North Korea apparently has nuclear weapons, and we know right now that they're producing the fissional material that's necessary to build more nuclear weapons. Iran is pressing forward with the nuclear program, and they're very vigorous at that. It's conceivable that before this decade is out, within the next year and a half, that we'll have a solid front of armed nuclear states that really stretch from the Persian Gulf. Now, you think about this. They stretch from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Sea of Japan. That, folks, is a long way. That's a big number. That arc runs through Iran, Pakistan, India, China, North Korea, with a nuclear re-emerging Russia looming just above that. And by the way, this isn't part of this briefing, but by the way, watch what's going on in Russia. And it doesn't make any sense to keep sticking a pencil in the eye of the Russians. Now's the time to kind of be gentle with the Russians, talk to them, and get things done. What we have, though, right now is a 4,000-mile arc of nuclear instability. Now, you think about that. And the reality, when you think about all that, is that the proliferation of nuclear-armed states vastly increases the likelihood that these weapons would be used in the future. Now, I spent my military career, the bulk of my military career, I spent 25 of my 35 years in the military worried about the Russians, the Cold War, except for a few little summer sessions in Vietnam. I worried the whole time about the Cold War and the Russians. But never once did I ever think that we were going to be in a nuclear war with Russians, because you had everyone that had nuclear weapons in was stable, and the leaders had just too much sense, I thought, to allow a nuclear holocaust. I don't believe that today. I am very worried about the proliferation of nuclear weapons and going into unstable regimes and unstable states. I believe that over the next 10 years, and this is as you're emerging into leadership positions, over these next 10 years, the greatest threat to our security could be nuclear-armed states that disintegrate into disorder and chaos. Now, you think about it. Unstable regimes have always been the wild card in history. And my number one candidate for that right now is nuclear-armed Pakistan. I worry all the time about them disintegrating and going to chaos, and you got a ton of nuclear weapons there that'll be available to terrorists. What I try to do is, in this cheerful speech I've given you, I try to highlight what I believe really, to me, are our three major problems and our three major challenges. Now, certainly there's others. You know, Afghanistan is a huge problem. The Israeli-Palestinian problem. We're not going to solve the problem in the Middle East until we come to grips with the Israeli-Palestinian problem. You got massive problems in Sudan and throughout Africa that if we don't address those and do something about them, they're just going to continue to get worse. And eventually they'll reach over and touch us. You got Chavez in Venezuela. You got an emerging China. You got a resurgent Russia. And there remains huge challenges in our country. You look at what we're in right now, the huge economic crisis. We're in the worst crisis we've been in probably since 1929. But I feel full that we're going to pull out of that. Massive immigration problems we have here. Problems with our own external security. We don't have any security on our aerial ports of embarkation, our seaports of embarkation. We don't have any security on our borders. Our health care system is fragile. Our social security system is fragile. And the national disaster of Katrina and things like that we can't cope with is just a disgrace. And I'm an Al Gore guy when it comes to the environment. I believe in what he says, and I think if we don't do something to correct that, then decades from now we'll pay huge problems because of that. I began all this by stating that what we need is a viable national security doctrine that was defensible by law, understood by our allies, and acceptable by our allies, and understood by our people. You know, from 1947 to 2002, we had a good one. Lasted 55 years. It was a very effective national security strategy. It was called containment. And it was developed to prevent Soviet expansions. It was developed to commit war only to commit to war when our vital interests were at stake, and to deal with an ideological contest that was going to be played out in the Third World, and that ideological contest, as you know, is communism. What we have now, preemptive war, certainly is not a doctrine. Don't even think that's a doctrine. Tell me what Harry Truman said about that. Truman says preemptive war is the weapon of dictators, not of free democratic countries like the United States and the Western countries. So what we have to do in the future, what you need to think about, what you need to begin developing your own style about, is what we must do is we have to select leaders that's going to restore the moral capital that we had, which has been severely depleted over the last years. And that is far more serious than you think it is. The force we need to overcome these threats is far more than military. We need a coalition of the threatened, and that coalition includes Western democracies, it includes threatened Middle Eastern regimes, it includes the Far East allies, including China. We need to stop this go-it-alone cowboy diplomacy with the message that we're going to change your country into democracy. And we need to rapidly, very rapidly, change our relationship with the rest of the world. We need to change it from one which is now significant rivalry mixed with a little bit of cooperation to one of significant cooperation mixed with a little bit of rivalry. So as you develop, go forward, graduate, lead the world, there is really no substitute for patience and diplomacy. And the last thing, the very last thing you want to get into is force. When you have to do that, then you do it as hard as you can. But you never do that until you've exhausted every diplomatic opportunity that you have. To sit down and talk with people is the way you solve problems. You don't threaten them. You work friendly until friendly doesn't get you there anymore. And I expect you all to do that because my generation hasn't done that.
Basically, there have been many semantics thrown around with the Iraq War. One of them being, of course, the war on terrorism, one of my favorites. Although, generally, I really don't believe that Iraq is really the heart of terrorism. Where do you believe is the geographic heart of terrorism? And also, you were talking about nuclear proliferation and how the terrorist groups are trying to get their hands on nukes. Well, basically, also, you have to realize that we have, like, what, thousands of nukes? And, what, it only takes 10 to blow up the entire world. So don't you think it's time for the United States to set an example for the rest of the countries and basically disarm our thousands of nukes and maybe leave, what? I mean, come on, you can blow up the entire world with 5. Why don't we just have 5?
Yeah, let me try to answer that a piece at a time. I do not think that Iraq is the basis of terrorism. I really don't. Although when I was there in 91, when we went into northern Iraq in 91, we did uncover several terrorist base camps that where Saddam Hussein was training some terrorists. But that was, 15 years before the war. I think the center of that probably is somewhere on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. But the corner of the realm in that is money. And one thing we have to do is dry up the money, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do. And until we dry up the money, we're not going to really be able to get at the real core of the terrorist movement. On nukes, I agree. I would do away with every nuke in the world if I could. I was never worried about ours. I thought we had pretty good control on ours until the Air Force started flying around with a bunch of bombs and didn't know it. So that's been bothering me a lot since then. I don't think, though, that we will disarm until we see others disarm. Although I think right now, I think that our administration ought to be leading major talks with the Russians and others to disarm, because, like you say, you can do. You don't need nukes to destroy a country. You can do it a lot of other ways. Do it economically. So yes, I agree with you 100%. When you get to be president, if they haven't done it by then, you do that.
I believe you said that you feel the surge has worked in Iraq, but you also said there's not really a leader in Iraq. The agendas are very sectarian. It's my understanding that troops are going to be withdrawing in Iraq to pre-surge levels, regardless of who's president. That's already been planned. You know it's going to happen. So, I mean, if both those things are true, isn't whatever gains we have made in terms of keeping the peace or whatever else in the surge, isn't that going to go away once that drawdown happens?
Yeah, I think this. I think the surge has worked, and it's a temporary success program. So I agree with you on that. And I think that we'll withdraw. No matter who becomes president, we're going to be forced to withdraw from Iraq within the next few years. If the Democrats win, probably a little sooner than the Republicans. Maybe not, though. But in either case, we're going to be forced to withdraw. And my fear is, as I said before, is when we withdraw, then we're opening the door for a genocidal civil war between the Sunnis and the Shia. And like I say, I think they can be averted if we put them in a federal system where they're in their own comfort zones and they don't fear one another. what the surge was supposed to do is create an environment and a safe haven environment that allowed the government inside that safe haven environment to begin to function adequately. And we've seen them, the surge has created these safe havens, but we haven't seen the government be able to function as we thought it would be able to function in that. So it's too early to tell what the outcome of the surge is, but I fear that it'll be just a temporary positive thing. And like you said, when we pull out and quit doing that, it'll all go back to the way it was. I hope I'm wrong.
Obviously, without giving away any endorsements, can you speak to the current debate in the presidential campaign over speaking with our enemies, preconditions versus no preconditions?
I talked to John McCain for a long time on the telephone about about 3 weeks ago, and we talked about Iraq and we talked about nuclear proliferation and several other things. And then I met with Tony Lake, who's Obama's, one of his foreign affairs advisors. I met with Tony Lake for about 3 hours. And I like Tony Lake. He and I had a great discussion on a whole variety of things, most of which was Iraq and again, nuclear proliferation, terrorism, that type of thing. So yeah, I mean, how much, I know what I said got to McCain. I don't know if he agreed with it or not, but I know that got to him. Whether or not what I said to Tony Lake got to Obama or not, I don't know. Whether Obama agreed with it or not. If it did get to him, I don't know. So.
Sir, I believe you said that you would like to see a federal system in Iraq, that you feel that would be the best way to alleviate the violence there. However, with the situation of there not being any oil in the western areas and the groups there, I feel that might create some conflict over oil revenue. Opinion on that?
Yeah, there's two answers to that. Number one, before you could create a Sunni federal region, you would have to go back into the Constitution and guarantee to the Sunnis their fair share of the oil revenue. And that can be based on anything. It can be based on population or something. However, having said all that, I can tell you there is oil in Anbar province in western Iraq. There's huge, huge natural gas reserves there. And there's reserves of concentrate and reserves of oil. So there's oil there, not to the degree that it is down in Basra, not to the degree it is around Kirkuk and Mosul, but there's oil there, and there's a lot of oil there and an awful lot of natural gas. What's happened is just the seismic and the geological studies there haven't been done for so many years. But we need to go back in there and do those studies, and I think we did that. They do a lot to pacify the Sunnis too, because the oil and the natural gas is there. It's a good question.
I just want a question about how big influence Iranian government on the Iraqi government.
The influence?
Yes, as far as the percentage-wise.
I think with the Sunni portion of the population, very little. I think with the Shia portion of the population, quite a bit, but even the Iraqis don't want to be led around by the Iranians, but there is quite a bit of Iranian influence, I think, with the Shia. And I think up with the Kurds, I think it's a give and take with the Kurds. I think the Kurds have always dealt off and on with the Iranians and always established a relationship with the Iranians. And there's more Iranian Kurds than there are Iraqi Kurds. It's interesting when you look at what's going on in the Kurdish regional government now. If you look at the Kurds in Iraq and the Kurds in Turkey and the Kurds in Iran, the Kurds in Iraq are the smallest number of all of them. But you take the president of Kurdistan, Masoud Barzani, whose father was Mullah Mustafa Barzani. Mullah Mustafa really, for the lack of a better analogy, is really the George Washington of Kurdistan. And he has, the current president, Masoud, has great, great sway over the other Kurds. And I would tell you, I believe in my heart of hearts that he controls somewhere between 15 and 20% of the parliament in Turkey because of the Kurdish element in the Turkish parliament. And all the Iranian Kurds key off what he does because he's the living icon right now for Kurds. Unfortunately, our administration doesn't understand that. They don't understand what a strategic asset that the Kurdish region of Iraq is for us right now because of its reach into Turkey, its reach into to Iran, its strategic location, the fact that they're sitting on an incredible amount of oil. They're going to be one of the wealthiest entities in the world in 10 more years. And they're 98% pro-U.S., over 98%. You take that little entity of Kurdistan, which is oil-rich, 98% pro-American. To the north is Turkey, which is at best 17% pro-American. To the east is Iran, which is about 0% pro-American. To the south is Iraq, which is pro-American in single digits. And to the west is Jordan, pro-American probably in the teens. Syria, pro-American 0. So you have this little island of incredible support and patriotism to the United States sitting in the Middle East. I mean, it is a strategic asset run by a guy who is admired by people all around him and has a certain amount of sway, and we don't take advantage of that. And it's unfortunate. Maybe whoever's the next guy will take advantage of that. Yes, sir.
Could you tell us what led up to your decision, I guess, I don't know, to leave the rebuilding of Iraq? And second, would you still like to be there in that position?
Well, it wasn't my decision. That's not first. When I got the call from Rumsfeld in late January, the last day or two of January 2003, to put together a team of interagency people that would handle the reconstruction, humanitarian affairs, and the governing of Iraq, I was told at that time that I would never go to Iraq, but they wanted me to put the team together and train it and vet all their plans and that type of thing, and that the president would select someone of stature then to take it over. That kind of teed me off because I'm only 5'7". I didn't like the choice of words, someone of stature, but and so I was told that I would probably never go to Iraq. Well, things sped up, and I ended up going over there with the team. And so when the night I got to Baghdad, I got a call from Rumsfeld and said, "Hey, Jay, everything's going great. Really think you're doing that. And by the way, I want to let you know that the president has chosen his envoy for Iraq. He's Ambassador Jerry Bremer. And he'll be over there and soon. I don't know when, and I don't know when the president's going to make his announcement." And I said, "Well, how about holding him off?" This was in April now. I said, "How about holding him off till about the 1st of July? Because we got a lot of things going right now. We're trying to set up an interim government. We're trying to solve the fuel crisis. We're trying to buy all the crops. We're trying to have elections in every city of 100,000 population and more. We were trying to bring back the Iraqi army. We were going through what I call a gentle debathification. We had a lot of things going, a lot of muscle movements going on." And he said, "Well, this is the president's call." And he said, "We pick the other guy, and I don't know. I don't think we can wait to July." And I said, "Fine. When I get here, then when he gets here, then I'll go home." He said, No. You got to stay there and be with him." I said, "Look, Mr. Secretary, you don't understand how this works. You can't put a new guy in charge and leave the old guy in charge there because the people under both of them have mixed loyalties. They now don't know who to follow. So the best thing I can do for Jerry Bremer is get the hell out of here whenever he gets here." And he said, "Well, stay there and transition." I said, "I'll stay as long as it takes to transition." And so I stayed with Ambassador Bremer for 3 weeks and came home. So when I come home, they say, "Okay, you got to go debrief the president." So I go see the president. And I sat there and debriefed Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, and the president. And so when I got through it, went about 45 minutes or an hour or so. When I got through, I told the president, I said, "Hey, Mr. President, let me tell you, you selected a great guy to run everything over there. I had a chance to work with Ambassador Bremer for three weeks. He has a great work ethic. He's a very bright guy. He's going to do a super job for you." And he looked at me and he said, "Hell, I didn't pick him. Rummy picked him just like he picked you." So Rumsfeld told me the president picked him. The president told me Rumsfeld picked him. When they picked him, I don't know. So anyhow, I ended up coming home, and I was home for the 4th of July. That wasn't all bad. So that's it. And yeah, would I like to? Yeah, I would have. I'd like to stay because I like the Iraqis. I love the Kurds, but I like the Iraqis also, and I'd like to stay. I kind of got an affinity for them and what they're doing. I think, Iraq is not a third world country. Now, don't ever think it is. It is a very, very sophisticated company with very, very smart people. And the history of the world starts there. Law started there. Mathematics started there. Agriculture started there. Incredible country with incredible people. So there's a lot that can be accomplished in that country if you can separate 2,000 years of hatred. And the only way to separate that is put them in federal regions, I think.
If America were to leave Iraq, then there would be a social genocide between the Shiites and the Sunnis. isn't it more because we want to establish American and solidify and establish American interests such as oil?
American what? I'm sorry.
Interests such as oil that we're seeing there? Because
Well, that's a theory. I hope that's not true. God, I hope we didn't do a preemptive strike on another country just for oil. I mean, I don't want to believe that, so I'm not going to believe that. And by the way, I think T. Boone Pickens is right. I think, we go to natural gas. But wait a minute, don't clap yet. Don't clap yet. Don't clap yet. Yeah. He's got wind and solar. Wind and solar take care of about at the most 4 or 5% of our needs. Natural gas would take care of a lot of it, and we do have a lot of natural gas. So you left nuclear out of there, and you're not going to be sufficient unless we go back to nuclear power. I think 3 Mile Island drove us off nuclear power. The people that have done it the best have been the French. But when you look at who holds the greatest amount of natural gas assets in this country, who is it? T. Boone Pickens. So there's a pony in there for everybody. Okay. It's called, I think it's called capitalism, right?
What do you believe the chances are for the possibility of a sovereign Kurdistan to come into position? And what do you believe that Turkey's reaction to a sovereign Kurdistani state would be?
I think there's, to the first part of that, a sovereign Kurdistan, I think there's two options, or not two opportunities. One is if Iraq stabilizes, and it stabilizes in the country over a long period of time, over a set of decades, the Kurdistan may be able to remove itself from that, and probably can. But it's over a long period of time and done very gently. The second part of that is if there's a civil war of that, it'll happen overnight. Now, that's the crux of your question. If it happens overnight, what do the Turks do? The Turks probably invade Kurdistan, and they'll invade it hard with a lot of troops. So the question is, what do we do about that? And if we let that happen, we're absolute fools. I mean, you're sitting there in the most strategic geographical space in the Middle East with a population that's 98.8% pro-American, that is all rich. And why don't we just put a small bases up there, put an air wing up there, put a couple of striker brigades there? It would be like, those of you who read your American history, it'd be kind of like the Philippines was to the Navy at the turn of the century. The value of the Philippines to us at the turn of the century, it was a coaling station for the Navy so we could keep the naval presence in the Far East. Well, if we did this, and if we put basing in Kurdistan, that would keep our presence in a very strategic location in the Middle East with a people that like us. And it would also mitigate against the Turks doing anything. It'd mitigate against the borders being penetrated on the Syrian side, and mitigate against the borders being penetrated on the Iranian side. It makes a lot of sense to do that. But unless we do something like that, I think the worst is the outcome you said is the worst, and it'll happen. Back in the back.
In regards to nuclear proliferation, if a state is so unstable that it would require for another nation, such as the United States, to step in order to disarm that nation of nuclear weapons, wouldn't it be counterproductive considering that it would be just another Iraq in regards to invading or using military action without actually the people wanting them there?
Unfortunately, that's a marvelous question. I just opened Pandora's box. I don't know how you go in and disarm a nation from their nuclear weapons. I mean, I don't know how you do that. I mean, you got to go occupy. If you're going to do that, you got to do it with force. If you do it with force, you got to occupy it. If you occupy, you got to have thousands and thousands of troops to do that, and they got to be willing to stay there a long, long time. And you got to be able to find them. We don't have the force levels to do that. I mean, any talk of invading Iran is sheer fallacy. I mean, we can go bomb Iran, but we'll pay for it in spades years after that. We don't have the force levels to go in and to enter into Iran and occupy Iran and do away with their nuclear weapons. We don't have the force to do that in Pakistan. In somewhere like North Korea, we don't have. We'd have to take the entire South Korean army for us to do that. So while you can think about doing through force, I mean, when you do something like that through force, it's the worst possible scenario you could get into, because number one, you probably can't sustain it, and number two, the outcome is not going to be what you want it to be. And I don't believe yet that we have exhausted our ability to be able to sit down with people and come up with a way to reason with them or to trade with them to do away with things like that. I mean, I don't understand what our relationship is with some of them. I don't know why we don't talk to, hell, I'd talk to Ahmadinejad. Hell, I'd talk to him anytime if I thought I could get something out of it. Why are we still have the relationships we have with Cuba? Well, hell, leave Cuba alone. Bring them back into the world where they were before. I mean, I just don't understand. We don't have to be that way. You can sit down and you can work with people, and I think 9 times out of 10 that works. The 10th time when it doesn't work, well, then you have to start considering some drastic measures. But you don't do that by yourself. When you're going to go into drastic measures, you get a coalition of everybody else that's threatened together. You know, I'm going to tell you, when you start thinking about coalitions, think about the first Gulf War, and think about Baker did nothing but fly on airplanes back and forth to France, to Germany, to the Middle East, to Britain, to everywhere. And first Bush built this huge coalition that went in only into Kuwait and threw the Iraqi army out of there. But you don't ever do things like that single-handedly. So, yes, sir. Well, if you do things like that, you're going to pay the consequences for it.
You mentioned that federalism would be a solution.
The what?
You mentioned that federalism would be a solution to the ongoing problems in Iraq. Are there any serious efforts at coming up with a system of federalism in Iraq today? Well,
of course, you already have a federal system. You already have that in the north with the Kurds. You have the Constitution is written in such a way that it allows that. What I think to do it now, I think it would take a groundswell from the governors of each of the provinces to get together to do that. And if I was in charge, the way I would do that, I would just very quietly have Masoud Barzani, who's sitting in a federal district, running a federal district that is absolutely the model. I mean, you go to Kurdistan now, there's no unemployment, there's no illiteracy, and business is good, people are happy, they vote. None of them think they're ruled by Baghdad, they all think they're ruled from Erbil. I'd take Masoud Barzani and I'd have him go around and talk very, very closely to the other 14 governors of provinces and say, hey, why don't you consider this? Now, it's interesting, they've had Arabs from southern Iraq come up to Kurdistan. They're amazed how well things are run, how great it is, how much freedom they have. And so I think it's doable. We could have done it almost immediately when we first went in there, but we wouldn't entertain the thought of federalism. But now I think there's still a chance, but you got to start at, not quite at the grassroots level, but you got to start at the provincial leadership level to do that. And again, it's allowed in the Constitution. And the key to that is you don't get rid of the Iraqi government right away. I mean, you let it stay there. And you let each one of those federal districts, they can do their own taxation. They set up their own minimum standards for health and education, elect their own leaders. They can have their own constitution, have their own security forces, et cetera, et cetera. And then the federal government would be much weaker, but it would have a small army. It'd send somebody to OPEC, send somebody to UN. It'd also do some taxation, delineate the type of currency you use, minimum standards for health, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you'd have two governing entities for a while, the federal governing entity and the republic or the national government entity. And over time, they'd either come together, they'd break apart, and whichever one happens, I don't care. Okay? Sir, thank you.